Hey, my name is Cordell, aka Hot Cocoa, and today we're going to talk about how to make a wub. I'm going to show you what a wub is, how to make it, but more importantly, I'm going to dive into a specific creative decision technique that I've used that helps me just create as many different variations as I want. So, if that sounds cool, stick around. Okay, so a wub. Classic word. I don't know if it's been formally defined yet, but it should be. It's so important to electronic music, to everything that I love. A wub is often used in genres like dubstep, drum and bass, halftime, wonky. It's all over the place nowadays, honestly. And it's actually a really simple kind of sound to make, but you can get really crazy with it. So a wub has basically three parts. That's why the word wub has three phonemes or three sounds in it. First, it's w, which is your attack. So wubs generally have a soft attack or a long attack, or two ways to say it, where it comes in slowly instead of hitting right away. Next is the or the u in wub, and this is shaped by the decay time, maybe even the sustain time of our envelope and our LFO here. And the length of the decay will determine the length of the in your wub. So you can have long decay, long wubs, super short decay with a really low sustain. Those are your fast wubs. And finally, you've got your b, which is generally just the end of the sound. It doesn't have a hard attack necessarily, it's just a clear-cut ending. So it's not just whoa, it's wub, and it's over. And that's going to come from your release on an envelope or an LFO. We're also going to do what I call branching rabbit holes. It's a technique for going deep into an idea and then also harvesting all of the ideas that come out of that on the sides. It's going to be really cool. Let's dive into it. So before we dive into Vital, I set my tempo to 140. I've grabbed a drum rack, and then I put the Vital patch into my drum rack. This is just my workflow that I like to play with since I'm going to drum a lot of this stuff out. I labeled it Wub. In fact, I want to label this Wub 1 because we're going to make many. And that's it. I then made a MIDI clip on this track with the drum rack by highlighting a section and pressing Command-Shift-M. So with that, we can hit this little icon right here to open up our Vital patch. And again, you can do this with any kind of software that you want to. Vital's just free and it's a really fun one, so I figured it's a really good one for the tutorial. Let's just hear what we've got so far. Painful. I don't like it. It is made up of just quarter notes and eighth notes. First, we're gonna just switch over to basic shapes and get a sine wave here. And then I'm gonna pitch this down to 2 octaves, -24. Yeah, now it's basically a sub. I'm gonna go down a little further to -31. Here's our envelope. And it's moving the attack up a little bit. It's gonna give us our W for our wub. If you can't hear that, it's because you're probably on headphones or computer speakers, but trust me, there's some deep wub down there. So that's our amplitude envelope over here. Let's make an envelope with this LFO. So you just click a node to move that around, and you click these smaller nodes to create these curves. So let's make a wub shape. And one of the most classic wub textures is called FM synthesis. So here in Vital, we're going to turn on oscillator 2. We're going to switch this to a basic shape as well, so that we're using a sine wave. We're going to turn the level down just for now so that we're only affecting this first oscillator. We'll click on this little window right here and go to FM oscillator 2. So now that's taking the sound from oscillator 2 and frequency modulating it into oscillator 1. Already wild. Very classic wub sound. It's always a great place to start, I think. So I'm going to put this LFO on that sound by clicking and dragging. And we're going to adjust how much it's affected by moving this little pie chart here. You can do it underneath the knob or over on the LFO. Either way works. Not bad. Already we got our wub. So you can see you got the attack, you've got the decay, and that release is basically when it ends. So that's a wub. That's how you make the wub. This is a classic wub that we'll save right here. But what we're going to start to look for is what I call a pivot point. So a pivot point is going to be at any point where making a decision between two things are both equally viable. You might have one rabbit hole you've been going down, and if you make a particular choice, it will really change the character of whatever you're working on. We're talking about this in the context of wubs, but this can happen with processing other types of sounds, processing your drums, or even beyond music into things like painting or graphic design or even business. This is a kind of creative technique. I talked a lot about creative decision making in one of my last videos on how to make a kick. If you want to get deeper into how decisions can be made effectively in terms of creative projects, here is like a piece of creative decision making that I use for creating way more ideas. It's an iteration technique. So basically, when you find this pivot point, instead of taking the pivot and completely changing everything, or ignoring the pivot and continuing with where you've been going, you do both. That's the key, is do both. This is one of my favorite mantras of life when you're trying to decide between two different things, is just to not decide and to actually do both of the options. So in our case, when we're making wubs, we're going to find this pivot point, and when we find the pivot point, we're going to make a copy. So I'm going to show you how to duplicate this wub, and we're going to keep working on this rabbit hole that we go down, and we're going to save this original wub and maybe do some more tweaking on it if we want to, but try to maintain the character of that one and then go off down this rabbit hole. But here's the thing, once you go off down another rabbit hole, you'll find another pivot point. On that pivot point, you do the same thing. You duplicate both, keep them both, and then either continue down this rabbit hole or continue down this new rabbit hole. Either way will give you another pivot point. And you do this until you're done, or you have enough material, or you're bored. But really, you can do this for eternity. This is why they're infinite wubs, because if you keep going down these rabbit holes, you keep experimenting, trying new things, seeing what sounds different, and just making changes. I mean, you couldn't end up just making mud, in which case sometimes you want to start over. But a lot of times you'll continue to make diverse, interesting new sounds, or have new experiences along these rabbit holes. And they're all cool. And since they all came from a similar source, they all kind of hang together in terms of musicality and sound design and texture. They can get really diverse, of course, but a lot of times they'll fit together. This is one of my main techniques for making sure I have a lot of diverse, interesting sounds in my productions, is because I'll create kind of a sonic landscape first, and these branching rabbit holes is a huge part of my sound design process. Okay, so I like where this is going, but what if we pitch up the second oscillator by an octave? I hold shift and drag, it'll go up one octave. Already pretty cool. I can start processing this high octave one, or I can start processing this low octave one, or I can choose this as my pivot point. So what I'll do is I'll close this window, I'll highlight this chunk inside the drum rack, I'll hold option, and I'll drag. Boom! I'm going to rename this Wub 2. And on Wub 1, I think I'm going to stick with the low one. With the low octave. But now I've got this Wub 2 over here, which is really cool. I can kind of process that later. Or I can just use it to contrast to this Wub. So let's keep playing with the one we started with and see if we could find any more pivot points. What if we changed the shape of this wavetable? Let's try drink the juice. Already pretty cool. And what we can do is put this LFO on a bunch of other stuff. This is a great way to find more pivot points, is just create more things that you're changing, more wubs that you're wubbing, you could say. So we're going to drag this LFO onto the wavetable movement knob, which is right here to the right of the wavetable image. So let's say you really like this particular part of the wavetable, but you also like this part of the wavetable. You can choose between the two, or you can simply pivot point and you can add this to the list of other wubs that you're making. So I'm just going to option drag it over, name it wub 3 over here, and then go back to the wubular that we were just on and pick the other option. Already. Yeah, this one I want to process a little bit further. Let's see where we can take it. Another place that you can start to get crazy is in effects. You can look for pivot points here. Putting the LFO on the cutoff of a filter is another classic way to get a wub sound. Okay, so I like that one a lot, and that's way different than this. They're all really distinct, and I can keep iterating on each one of these. But now I've got 3 wubs instead of 1, and I can keep doing this process as long as I want to. This is a really great way to have a big diversity of sounds. So I'm going to make a few more of these wubs and test them out, see how they feel in my fingers and on the drumsticks. If you thought finding these rabbit holes and learning about wubs was helpful, don't forget to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment below. I read all the comments. And also let me know if there's anything else you want me to cover or dive into, especially when it comes to creativity psychology and music technology. I'm merging the two of those together as best I can. Creativity psychology resources can be found at upwardacts.com, link in the description, where I've got podcasts and articles and resources galore that you'll love. And if you want to buy any of my sound design or stream any of my tracks, check the link below as well. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.